Hey guys, and welcome back to Tony the Technician's channel, and today we're going to be going over how to solder wires. This is another clip to a previous video I made on the wiring harness of my Camaro. I needed to resolder some stuff, so I decided to do my own separate video of how to solder wires, things you'll need, and all of that. So there's a few different types of solder that you can get, and there's like lead-free, acid, and you need to use flux. Basically, when you're working with the electrical, you want to use resin or rosin flux core because that's better for electrical stuff. Whereas there's another one that is an actual acid core, and you don't want to use that on wiring because it can become corroded and stuff. You mainly use that on like pipes and stuff like that to fill in cracks and stuff like that. So you don't want to use that type of solder on electrical wires. This is a 60-40 mix of tin and lead. So that's what I'm going to be using, and I really suggest that for anybody doing some electrical work. The other thing you'll need is heat shrink. You can get this at Harbor Freight, Walmart, basically anywhere. I think this set was like $5 and it's basically 130 pieces. And what you want to do is really find the heat shrink that fits your wire best. You don't want to be going with a huge piece of heat shrink on a small wire like this. You know, you got quite a big, and there's no way you can heat this enough to actually seal where you solder at. So really find something small enough, maybe something like this. I believe this wire that I'm going to be soldering is 16 gauge, so it's pretty small stuff, and that'll fit on there pretty nicely. So besides that, you'll need your soldering gun or soldering iron. I have the soldering gun because that's what my school provided me with. I am getting a butane torch though. This is a soldering gun. Soldering irons are much smaller, lighter, more portable. I like them a little bit better, but this is what I'm dealing with. The good thing about soldering guns though, with something this size, you can do wires that are pretty thick, whereas a soldering iron with a much smaller tip and everything, you can only do smaller wires. So if you're going to be doing larger wires, I suggest a soldering gun. I got my solder here, got my wire heat shrink. Next thing you'll need are some wire strippers. These are nice because they automatically strip wires when you put them in. So I'll just show you. So you put the wire in here, and it clamps down on it, and it strips the wire. Really handy, super easy to use. But then you also have multiple different kinds. These are my favorite. I have a couple other pair, but so we'll find 16 gauge, and there you go, stripped. So either way, you're gonna need some wire strippers. And then another thing that really helps out, you don't need it, but some helping hands. They come in handy when soldering because that means you don't have to hold the wires or lay them somewhere and try and solder at the same time. These little arms reach out and you can put your wire in here and it holds down on the wires. You can put the wires together here and just solder away. That's basically it as far as things you need. I have a wet sponge here for the tip of my soldering gun because you will get quite a bit of solder on the tip, and it can kind of make it a pain in the butt to solder sometimes. So you need to clean the tip of your soldering iron or soldering gun. They also make this like soldering wax that really helps solder, but I don't have any, sorry, so I can't show you that. But I will show you the basics of how to solder some wires together for a strong, easy connection that will last a really long time. Okay, for this, I've just cut a simple piece of wire. Let me go ahead and clip these off. Now, when you go to remove the insulation, you want to remove about 1 inch because you want plenty of wire to be able to twist together. Now in some situations like my Camaro where they've snipped a wire really close to the end, it's really hard to get 1 inch off of that without ruining the wire. But sometimes you got to make do. But with this, you really want to make sure that they're about 1 inch removed and that you have about the same length removed on both wires. So that's why I use these wire strippers, because you can set the leg to where they remove the same amount of insulation off of the wire. So you get about the same length right there. And you just do that by setting the leg distance on this wire stripper. Next thing you want to do is decide which way you want to solder the wires or put the wires together, because you can either separate all of these little legs on both ends and force them together like this and then twist them. That's a good way. Or you can twist them both. This is the way I do it most of the time. I just twist both ends. And before you go any further, don't forget to put on your heat shrink. It's going to be kind of hard to put it on after you've already tied the wires together. And you want to get it as far away from where you're going to be soldering as possible, because the heat from the soldering gun puts off quite a bit of heat, and it can actually shrink your heat shrink before you're ready. So once you've twisted both ends, you just put them as an X, and then you twist them together nice and tight. And you really want to make sure that the ends aren't sticking up, because you don't want it to poke through your heat shrink when you go to finish up. So now that we have that set, you can see both wires are twisted together. It's already pretty strong, so when we set this solder on here, it should create a nice strong bond. Now, one thing you don't want to do is hold your, have your wire here, and you don't want to put your soldering gun on top and then, feed the solder into it, because then it creates blobs and it's really not a strong bond and it really doesn't look good. What you want to do is you want to take your soldering gun and you want to place it below the wires and heat the wires themselves. Don't put the solder on the soldering gun, you put it on the wire as the soldering gun heats the wire. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set this up in my helping hands and get my soldering gun ready, and then we'll solder these wires together. Okay guys, so I have my soldering gun plugged in. I already heated it up and wiped it down with a wet sponge. Now with this soldering gun, you have two settings. Half of the trigger is high, full pull is low, and it heats up extremely fast. Now, the way I have this set up is where the wire is just high enough that the soldering gun sits there without me having to hold it, and it touches the bottom of the wire. This way it just heats up the wire. You want it directly in the middle. Another important thing is to wear iPro, because even though this seems like a pretty simple process and isn't very dangerous as long as you don't burn yourself, when you're heating solder, you actually take the chance when you're melting the solder that it creates air bubbles in the solder as it melts, and it can actually pop and blow in your face. So you really want to protect yourself and have enough solder unraveled to kind of keep your hand away from everything, and you're just going to run it on the top of the wire, and when the wire is heated, it should melt the solder into the wire. You don't want to be holding your soldering gun on the top and touching this to the tip, because then you get blobs and it's a really weak connection, and that's just something you don't want to do. Now, one thing is you want to be pretty steady with this, and I'm pretty shaky, so we'll see how this goes. Okay, so I just have the soldering gun heating up. It does take a minute. Even though this does get extremely hot, extremely fast, it still takes a while for the heat to transfer into the wire. So I've given it about a minute. Seems that the wire is quite hot enough, so I'll put it on low. We'll see if we can melt some of this in too. And you just want to let it cool. Once you have it the way you want, you don't want to mess with it. Now granted, this does take practice. I haven't done this in a while, so it didn't turn out quite as nicely as I wanted it to, but that's why I'm doing this. Before I go soldering anything on my Camaro, I'm going to keep practicing and get to where I'm happy with it and I know I have a strong connection. Okay guys, so there's the solder of the wire. It's okay, didn't quite get the back, but I'm gonna go ahead and keep practicing. But as far as the heat shrink, you'll just slide it over. You can actually put dielectric grease in here to kind of prevent corrosion and stuff as well. But then you just take your lighter or heat gun and you heat it up, working from the center out. And there you go. Sealed up nice and tight. And it's very strong. Those wires are not coming apart. But I'm gonna go ahead and snip it and do another one and see if we can get a better solder. So this time I've separated the wires and actually meshed them together. This is the other way of doing it. Now that you have them kind of pushed into each other, now you can just take them and twist the wires. So there you go. Now it's tied together, it looks really nice, and now we can go ahead and heat it up and lay some solder. So I got the wire heated up. So I think this one turned out quite a bit better. Take that now. And don't touch this, let this completely cool. And we should have a nice strong solder on this one. You guys can see it a little bit better now. You can actually see that the solder has soaked into the threading of the wire. It's really soaked through it all. Now, this just takes practice. I haven't done it in probably a year or so. But it's pretty easy to catch on. It's a fairly fast process for what it's worth. I mean, I think it's a lot better than using butt connectors and stuff. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. Oh yeah. Sorry if that's not clear. Let me go ahead and set you guys up better. Okay guys, so you did see how the solder kind of popped and splattered. That will happen. Just make sure to be safe and just practice. Make sure you just grab some wire and practice before you go straight into whatever you're working on, especially if it's important, like my wiring harness. Definitely gonna keep practicing, even though we got a pretty good solder right here, if it'll focus. But either way, it's a really good solder, nice and strong. And that's basically it. So if you guys have any questions, soldering irons range from, you know, pretty damn cheap, $10 to up there around $100 or so. But It's a good thing to learn. It comes in handy, and even though it takes a little bit longer than butt connectors, I think it's well worth it. Let me know what you guys think. Hopefully this was helpful, and I'll see you guys next time. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up, comment if you have any questions or suggestions, and subscribe if you're not a subscriber. Thank you guys.